Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another off-season preview video here to discuss. Look at the next two teams who wound up being eliminated in the first round of the playoffs. We're looking at the LA Kings and the Nashville Predators. What went wrong for them in the playoffs? We'll look at the RFA's UFA's and draft capital for this upcoming offseason. And we'll look at 5 ways these teams can improve in the offseason to get better so we can go on a deeper run in the playoffs next year. With all this coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Intended Hockey channel. Before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe down below. Thank you all for your support. I'll know it's with you guys. We're so close to 300 subscribers, so if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. And don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so I'll discuss in today's video. Now, as usual, got another off-season preview video here to discuss. We're looking at the LA Kings and Nashville Predators. These two teams were eliminated in round 1 of the playoffs this year. Kings, I was expecting to go far. I picked them as a surprise upset against the Oilers. Wound up being bounced in 5, so I was a little bit surprised there that they didn't go at least longer, but the Oilers did want to be in the Kings yet again for a third straight year. Well, for the Predators, I was expecting them to lose to Canucks. I said it was going to be in 5. Predators wound up losing in 6, so they were at least able to get another win out of that series, but still, the Predators did wind up losing in round 1. So we'll go through these two teams, figure out why they wound up missing the playoffs. Kings were third in the Pacific, Preds were first wild card this year in the West, so neither of these teams are too surprising to be out in the first round. So we'll look at the LA Kings first. They were the first team eliminated of those two teams. So first, the Kings. Why were they eliminated by the Edmonton Oilers? Now, 3 reasons in my opinion why this team was eliminated by the Oilers. First, awful special teams. Their special teams sucked in this series. Their penalty kill was at 55%. They let Edmonton score on almost half of their power plays. That was awful for the Kings. On top of that, their power play, non-existent. They had 0% on the power play. Weren't able to get a power play goal in round 1. You can credit that to Edmonton's penalty kill, but LA's power play had to be better, and it wasn't. So the lack of special teams in that series was a big reason, in my opinion, as to why this LA Kings team wound up being bounced in the first round by Edmonton. Their power play was non-existent. Their penalty kill was absolutely atrocious, and the penalty kill was actually pretty good in the regular season. So the penalty kill and the power play and that whole special teams was the main reason, in my opinion, why this Kings team wanted to miss the playoffs. Get a couple of extra power play goals. Maybe they're in this series, and it's at least a 6-game series, but due to the lackluster special teams, Kings team wound up being eliminated in round 1. Bad goaltending. Talbot did not look overly good in the first 3 games, letting 7 goals in game 1, led 4 goals in game 2, led 6 goals in game 3. To go over to Riddick. Riddick has at least a little bit of a better showing. He only let 1 goal in game 4. He only let 4 goals in game 5, so it was a little bit of a better performance there from Riddick. But still, the Kings goaltending was not great this playoffs. Both Riddick to some extent as well, but also Talbot, they just did not show up in the playoffs. Same sort of thing happened last year in the last 3 games of that series against Edmonton. Korpisalo did not look overly good. They changed up their goaltending. Braun Talbot did really good in the regular season. Riddick, Copley did alright as backups, but this Kings team needs to change something in goal. It just didn't work in the playoffs, and in my opinion, the goaltending, the extremely terrible goaltending from Talbot and Riddick were main reasons, in my opinion, why this team was eliminated in round 1. And lastly, was not enough offense. When you're playing a team like Edmonton, you're going to have to find some ways to score a couple more goals than the Oilers. They did in game 2, found ways to do that, but they were not able to consistently push ahead and get a lot of goals. They only had, I think it was 6 players who had over 3 goals in those 5 games they played against the Edmonton Oilers, and 2 of them were the defensemen, Anderson and Doughty. So they did not have a whole bunch of really good offensive performances. I think Fiala had under 3 points, Moore had under 3 points, Dubois had under 3 points. I mean, they're big boys, the ones that they're supposed to have they're contributing from. They didn't show up. I mean, Kempe showed up, Kopitar showed up, Byfield was actually pretty good. Besides that, they really didn't have a whole bunch of really good offensive performances. So, in my opinion, awful special teams, bad goaltending from Talbot and Riddick, and on top of that, not enough offense from their forward group were the 3 main reasons, in my opinion, why the Kings team wound up losing in round 1 yet again to the Edmonton Oilers. Going over to the teams pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for its upcoming offseason. If you look at their UFAs, not a whole bunch here, mostly lower end guys, but there are a couple of significant ones. You do have Victor Arvidsson, who has 6 goals and 15 points in 18 games this year. Looks like a fantastic middle 6 forward. Not sure if he'll be brought back by Kings or not, but he's going to be UFA. You also have depth pieces in Tynan, Maltsev, who didn't get into NHL action this year, and Trevor Lewis, who had 8 goals and 16 points in 82 games. All are at best flying forwards, mostly spare forwards. So I could see all three of those guys when I'm believing. You have Matt Roy, who had 5 goals and 25 points in 81 games. Roy's a fantastic top 4 right shot defenseman. I think there'll be a ton of teams interested in him if he goes to the free agent market, so that'll be interesting. Then you also have Cam Talbot and Phoenix Copley, the two guys who are their starters and backup going into this year. Copley had 8 games played at .870 save percentage and a 3.17 GAA. Talbot had 54 games played with a .913 save percentage and a 2.50 GAA. And after the way Talbot played in the postseason, as well as the way Copley was playing in the regular season, I think it's very likely those two are not back with LA. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But those are the UFAs for the LA Kings for this offseason. The RFA list is a long one. They have Quentin Byfield, who's an RFA, has 20 goals, 55 points in 80 games this year, really started to come out and show that he can be a really good top 6 forward, so he's going to need a new extension. You have Turcotte, who had a goal and 4 points in 20 games. Thomas, who had 3 goals and 4 points in 7 games. Fagemo, who had a goal in 8 games. Kaliev, who had 7 goals and 15 points in 51 games. Gresham, who had 8 goals and 12 points in 50 games. Madden, who did not get into NHL action this year, and Lizotte, who had 7 goals and 15 points in 62 games. All are going to be pending RFAs this year. Now, Kaliev, I think there's a very likely chance the Kings move on for him, whether that be letting him go or trading him. Turcotte, I expect to be back. Thomas, I expect to be back. Madden, I expect to be back. I think Fagemo could be moved on, but I think it's possible he's back. Grunstrom, Lizotte, I think are pretty good bottom 6 forwards. I think they're both back, so we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens for the LA Kings. But this is going to be an interesting situation there for the Kings. Lots of RFAs. I think there's a very likely chance most of those guys are going to be back. You also have our right shot defenseman Jordan Spence. Spence had 2 goals and 24 points in 71 games this year at the NHL level. Looks like a fantastic third pair right shot defenseman, so I expect him to be back. And you also have Eric Portillo, who did not get into a game of NHL action, but looks like a fantastic future starting goaltender for the Kings, so I expect him to be re-signed too. So some interesting stuff there for the Kings. If you look at the Kings draft capital for this upcoming offseason, it's not looking overly good right now. They have their 1st round pick, 4th round pick, and 6th and 7th round pick. Besides that, they don't have anything else. They don't have their own 2nd, they don't have their own 3rd, they don't have their own 5th, and they also don't have any extra picks they have. So some pretty bad stuff there for the Kings. In fact, they don't have a lot of draft capital and only have 4 picks for this upcoming offseason, so bad stuff there for LA. And lastly, 5 ways the Kings can improve in the offseason to get better for next year. 1, need to find new goaltending. I just talked about this. Talbot did not look overly good in the playoffs and down the stretch. Riddick, as much as he looked pretty good and was a decent goaltender and did just recently resign on a 1-year extension, I'm not sure if he's the best option for backup, and I don't think Copley's coming back for the Kings either. So with that in mind, I think the Kings are going to overhaul their goaltending situation now with Riddick signed. It's possible he's the backup next year, but also wouldn't be overly surprised if they went out and got another guy who can challenge Riddick for to be the backup job. And I definitely expect them to go after a starter. I'm not sure if it'll be Saros or Markstrom or Gibson or something like that, or if they'll try and sign someone in free agency like a Kakkonen or the Smith. I'm not exactly sure who they'll try and target, but I think the Kings really need to go out and try and get a really solid starting level goaltender who they can make saves at key times in their season. So I think they need to find a new goaltender. I think they need to add in the top 4 defensemen. Now, they have Brandon Clark, who I think will be an NHL defenseman next year. You still have Gavrikov. You have Doughty, Anderson, but you're losing Matt Roy most likely in free agency. So I think there's a very likely chance that the Kings will try and look to add another top 4 defenseman. Not sure if that's via free agency with guys like Ferraro or Jokiharju or Vanakainen, or on the free agent market with guys like Gostisbehere and Tanev and Montour. Not exactly sure who they target, but I think there's a very likely chance the Kings try and go after a solid top 4 right shot defenseman who can really help spread out more spots there on the defensive end. I think they need to consider moving Dubois and Kaliev. There's been a lot of talk over the past little while about Kaliev being moved. It sounds like there's a lot of frustration in that system with Kaliev and the Kings, and I think there's a very likely chance that the Kings will move on from Kaliev. Not exactly sure where he goes or what the return package would be, but I definitely think Kaliev being moved is a very likely opportunity for the Kings. On top of that, Dubois, we talked about this a couple of times in the last couple of videos. Dubois, I think, is a very likely chance of being moved. There's some outside chance he gets bought out, but it sounds like he won't get bought out anymore. So there's a very likely chance that if they were to move on from him, it would be most likely a trade. Like I said, not exactly sure what the Kings would want for him, but there's been a lot of talk about Dubois not working out overly well in LA, so I think there's a very likely chance the Kings move on from him. I think they need to add 1 to 2 top 9 forwards. Their forward group is pretty good right now. They have Fiala, Moore, Kopitar, Deneau, Dubois. There are some pretty decent forwards in that group, and they're going to get some more in the youth category. But I think they could definitely benefit from adding another 1 to 2 top 9 forwards. They're most likely going to lose Arvidsson this year, who's a big piece of their top 6. So I think they can get 1 to 2, maybe middle 6 forwards who can work on their second or third line. I think that would be a pretty big win there for the Kings. So we'll have to wait and see on that. And lastly, I think they're going to get younger this year again. Spence, who played majority of the season this year at the NHL level, I think is most likely going to be a regular NHLer next year. Brandt Clark, who a lot of people thought was going to be a regular NHL player this year, I expect wholeheartedly to be a regular NHLer next year. You have Akil Thomas, who looked pretty good in his 7 games of NHL action this year. You have Alex Turcotte, who looked pretty good before getting injured. I think both those guys are going to be future top 9 forwards for that LA Kings team. I think there's a very likely shot both those guys could get NHL looks as early as next year. So we'll have to wait and see exactly who winds up being there at the NHL level next year. But Clark, Spence, Thomas, Turcotte, I think they're all very likely options there for the Kings to try and improve, to get younger and continue to get a little bit more youth into this team. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there. But that's what I think about the LA Kings. Those are 3 reasons, in my opinion, why those teams missed the playoffs. Those are pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason. And those are the 5 ways I can see the Kings improving the offseason to get better and a lot more dangerous for next year, so they can go on a deeper playoff run. Next, going over to Nashville Predators. Now with Nashville, no one really was expecting the Predators to make the playoffs. At first, it looked like the Predators were going to be a team on the outside looking in, but then they went on a 16-game point streak, looked fantastic, were a great team for the remainder of the season, were one of the hottest teams down the stretch, were able to get into the first wildcard position, faced off against the Canucks, played the Canucks extremely hard. A lot of people thought that the better team wound up losing that series, and they wind up losing. So Predators do wind up losing. It was a really close, tightly contested series, but the Preds do lose in 6. So it was an interesting series, but 3 reasons, in my opinion, why this Predators team wound up being eliminated by the Canucks in the first round. 1, the power play, one of the worst power plays in the NHL this playoffs. It was running at an under 10% power play rate, so the power play was not overly good for the Predators the times they had the power play, and was a real killer for them. So that's probably the main reason, in my opinion, why this team wound up missing the playoffs. 2, bad goal scoring. They did not have a whole bunch of really good offensive weapons entering the playoffs, and it was really hard for them to find offense in the playoffs. I mean, Forsberg, once again, was fantastic. Nyquist had pretty good playoffs after a fantastic season. There were a couple of other guys who had some pretty good contributions too, but there was not a whole bunch of elite level goal scoring for the Predators team. So, in my opinion, the bad goal scoring, especially the depth goal scoring, was a major problem for this Predators team and a major reason as to why this team wound up being eliminated from the first round. And lastly, missed opportunities. I mean, they had a 3-1 lead at one point in Game 4. They could have finished that out. It would have been a 2-2 series heading back to Vancouver. Maybe there's a little bit of a difference that happens. They played a really close game in Game 6. If there's a bounce or 2 that goes in, maybe the Predators win that to Game 6 and force 7. So they had a couple of really good opportunities to take this series away from the Canucks, and they just missed out on it. So, in my opinion, the sour power play, absolutely atrocious, running it under 10%. The bad goal scoring, which really did not do overly good for the Predators, especially the depth, was non-existent on that forward group, and the missed opportunities on that team to put away the Canucks were major reasons, in my opinion, as to why this Predators team wound up being eliminated in round 1 against the Canucks. So that's my opinion on the Predators and why they missed the playoffs. Going over to pending UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason. If you look at pending UFAs, not a whole bunch here. If you look at the forward group, you have Jason Zucker, who was an in-season acquisition, 14 goals, 32 points in 69 games with Arizona and Nashville. I expect him to be gone. You have Bouvillier, another in-season acquisition, 5 goals, 17 points in 60 games with the Hawks, Canucks, and Predators. A very likely chance he's gone too. You also have Kiefer Sherwood, who had 10 goals and 27 points in 68 games. Decent bottom 6 forward, could definitely see him be brought back, but not overly surprised if he leaves. You also have right shot defenseman Tyson Barrie and Alex Carrier. Barrie, who had a goal and 15 points in 41 games. Carrier, who had 4 goals and 20 points in 73 games. I expect both those guys to probably be moved on. Carrier did not look overly great, and Barrie was barely able to get into the lineup this year, so some bad stuff there for Predators, and I expect both those guys to be gone. And lastly, Lankinen in the backup position, 24 games played, 908 save percentage, 2.82 GAA. Very likely chance, in my opinion, that Lankinen probably winds up moving on. Not exactly sure it's a given, but I think there's a possibility Lankinen moves on. So those are pending UFAs for that team. Going over to pending RFAs for the Predators, there's a decent amount of RFAs. They have to deal with this offseason. You have Juuso Parssinen, who in 44 games had 12 points, 8 goals. Looked like a pretty good player. I think eventually could be a solid bottom 6 forward, so I expect him to be brought back. You have Tomasino, who had 7 goals and 20 points in 41 games. Really good middle 6 forward. I expect him to be brought back. You have Afanaseyev, who got into 2 games of NHL action. Looks like a pretty good player. I expect him to be brought back. You have Wade Allison, who didn't play at the NHL level, but still was a pretty good player this year at the AHL level. I expect him to be brought back. You have Anderson Dolan, who had 4 points in 31 games. You also have Liam Foudy, who had 3 points in 13 games. Both were waiver claims. Not exactly sure if they'll both be brought back, so we'll have to wait and see on those two, but I think there's a very likely chance that both those guys are wind up being moved on. If on the defensive end, you have Stastny, who had 4 points in 20 games of NHL action, and Delgazio, who had 3 assists in 9 games of NHL action. Looks like a pretty good player, both of them do, so I can definitely see both those guys be brought back, so I'll have to wait and see on that. If you look at the team's draft capital for this upcoming offseason, they have a lot of draft picks, especially in the top end of the draft. They have no 5th, 6th, or 7th round picks this offseason, but they have their own first, 3 seconds, including their own, the Jets and the Bolts, 2 thirds, including theirs and the Stars, and 3 fourths, including theirs, the Hawks, and the Oilers. So they have 3 in the 4th round, 3 in the 2nd round, 2 in the 3rd round. They have a 1st round draft pick as well. So there's a lot of draft pick for the Predators, 9 in total, and none beyond round 4. So they're going to have a lot of really good draft selections, and there's a very likely chance they could move on some to try and improve in other areas. So I'll have to wait and see on that, but the Predators do have a lot of really intriguing options here on the draft pick group. And lastly, 5 ways you can see the Predators improve to get better for next year. First, need to figure out the Saros situation. It's probably the biggest question this team has going into the offseason. There was a ton of trade speculation around Saros when this Predators team was not doing good. Then when they started to heat up, got into a playoff spot, the Saros speculation died down because they were not trading Saros when they were in a playoff spot. And now Saros trade speculation is probably going to start to pick up again. Saros is going to be entering the final year of his deal. There's been a lot of talk out there that the Predators may not want to pay Saros what he would want on a new deal. So if that's true, I think there's a very likely chance we could see a Predators trade Saros. Maybe there's still a chance he winds up resigning, but I think Ascara is the future net for Nashville, and with that in mind, I think they could also really get a huge return, in my opinion, for Saros. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there with Saros, but I think they need to figure it out. Do they either sign him and give him a new long-term 8-year extension, or do they move him and try and get a massive haul in return that could help them in other places of need with Askarov in the minors? So definitely, it'll be interesting to see there. On top of that, they need to add another third pair of defensemen. There's a very likely chance Barry and Carrier, who are a really good third pair of defensemen this year, are going to be gone. So with that in mind, I think they need to try and add another right shot defenseman who can work on the third pair. Not exactly sure who they would try and target, but I think there's a really good chance to try and add another third pair right shot defenseman, whether that be via the trade market or the free agent market. I think they need to use some more draft capital to upgrade that forward group. It's not the best of forward groups right now, and like we just said, they have a ton of draft capital for not only this year, but also for a couple more seasons in the future. So I think there's a very likely chance with them still having a lot of that forward group together, and guys like Bouvillier and Zucker being moved off of their roster, I think there's a really good chance we could see the Predators wind up adding some more pieces. I'm not exactly sure who they would try and target, but they could try and use some of their draft capital to get some forwards on the trade market, like a Andrew Mangiapane or a Taylor Hall from Chicago, or potentially maybe a Robbie Fabry from Detroit. Not exactly sure who they'll try and target, but those could be guys. If you look at the free agent market, they could go after Victor Olofsson or Kevin LeBanc or Patrick Kane or something like that. Not exactly sure who they'll try and target, but I think there's a very likely chance that they'll try and upgrade their top 9 by adding 1 to 2 more players. I think they need to add some more youth to this team. They're sort of in a retool/rebuild form. They had Evangelista play a lot of games this year as a young player. Novak got into a full 82-game season. Tomasino got a look at the NHL level. So did Juuso Parssinen. So there was a lot of really good options there for the Predators to get some more youth in this team, and I think they'll continue to do it this year to get more younger for next year. I think Tomasino, Parssinen, very likely to be NHL forwards next year. I also wouldn't be surprised if they looked at guys like Kamel, Schaefer, or LaRue. All 3 are really good future top 9 forwards for the Predators, so I expect all those guys to be future studs at the NHL level for the Predators. So I expect those guys to be in the NHL level. Stastny got into some NHL games that ended this year. I think there's a very likely chance chance he gets into some more NHL games and is more of a consistent defenseman next year. And on top of that, I think Askarov, if they do end up moving Saros, there's a very likely chance to be the team's new starter, or at least the tandem goaltender for the Predators. So I'm not exactly sure who they'll bring up, but I think this team is bound to get younger this offseason, and it'll definitely help this team to continue to improve and get better for the future. And lastly, I think they need to consider moving Fabro and Glass. Fabro has going to be entering the final year of his deal, $2.5 million extension that he just signed recently. He'll be a UFA at the end of the contract, so I think there's a very likely chance that they can't come to terms on a long-term extension. Fabro will be moved, and I wouldn't be overly surprised if that happens. Glass did really good last year and started this season out pretty good as well, but was also healthy scratch at times too this year, so I think there's a very likely chance that Glass might be moved by the Predators. Not saying it's a guarantee, but Glass, I think there's a very likely chance that we could see him potentially be moved, and I think his name will be out there in the rumor mill. So we'll have to wait and see exactly what happens there, but that's my opinion on the Predators. Those are the three reasons why I think they were eliminated by Vancouver. Those are UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason, and those are the 5 ways I can see this team improve in the offseason to get better and maybe make a deeper run next year in the playoffs. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's my thoughts on the Predators and the Kings. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. Do you agree with me about the Predators and the Kings and why they were eliminated in round 1? What do you think about the UFAs, RFAs, and draft capital for this upcoming offseason? Do you agree with my thought process as to why those two teams might wind up making some improvements in the offseason to get better for the next year? And if not, what do you think they can do in the offseason to improve for next year? Definitely let you guys' thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk about for today. We're going to this video, and if you like to, remember to subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. I know it's with you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so someone else listening to this video. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so if you check that out, leave a link in the description below, and I can't wait to see you guys all for next video. See you guys soon.